So good morning again, you all, dear friends. Welcome back. We have a working session, as Antonio has challenged us once again. And I think that's the real target and the real scope for our plan of action. So I will invite straight away for our panel with the challenge, not talking about journalistics, about sustainable finance, but talking about what is it for and how can we move beyond sustainable finance into driving for pragmatism and activating the ecosystem available. So we'll be looking at your experience, or your recommendations, and coming down to the projects, a call to action, a list of very specifics. That's I think our challenge for this next hour. So I kindly ask to take the floor. Anna Morsi is entering via streaming. I don't know if the lady is available. She's the Deputy Executive Secretary and Chief Economist of UN Economic Commission for Africa. But we'll find out in a few moments. Then I will welcome Leslie Mazur, please. Leslie is a VP and CEO of New Development Bank in Shanghai, a long experience in investment bank. Please take a seat. I will also welcome Luís Gonçalves, CEO of Banco Fomento de Angola, and my dear friend Rogério Campos Henrique, CEO of Grupo Fidelidade, a global player, and Portugal also generates global players, and we'll talk about it in a minute. Thank you. I take the orange. Rogério. So, and I ask, please, the technical team, whenever Anna Morsi is ready to enter into a streaming directly with us. There's two ways to go into this conversation. The classic model, which I don't advocate, I can put formal questions, we go around the panel, or an open discussion. And I will challenge you to do that. And the first point is, what's the setting for financing impact projects in Africa? That's what our companies, our business people want to hear, your long experience, as Antonio, I think he did a very good summary when he said, what are the projects, the tenders, the opportunities, and how we move on from EPC into EPC plus F. And that plus F makes all the difference. There are a lot of opportunities, potential, matching to be done, and very often what we lack is the F. So let's find out what's available on the ecosystem, and that can be really a transformational lead and help for everybody that is hearing us. And it will also give a drive, a sense of being and meaning, even to the Diaspora Council. We believe that these agendas need to gain life, and they make sense if they have a very concrete agenda to be deployed on the ground. So that's what we are here for. Leslie, let's start with you, please. Regarding the several programs available, instruments, and even with your experience from Shanghai, looking in the scope, you are from South Africa, so you have very interesting intelligence to share with us. Where do you see the potential and the scope of your bank and the multilaterals that you work with in order to finance further projects in Africa? Thank you for coming again.
Thank you very much, Pedro, for having me and for the Diaspora Council for this opportunity. Let me start out by just giving maybe two brief remarks about the New Development Bank, where I work. The New Development Bank is a multilateral bank, a little bit like the World Bank or Africa Development Bank, Asia Development Bank. We're in the business of financing infrastructure with the emphasis on sustainable infrastructure. This bank was created by the BRICS countries, that is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and the bank is now rapidly expanding to become a more global, emerging markets anchored multilateral bank. There's been quite fundamental changes that have happened in the whole sustainable finance area over the last 5 to 8 years. And it offers great opportunity for Africa in my view. And I'd like to come to that in a second. The first point to make is that this change towards sustainable finance is it's a fundamental transformation of the way we looked at finance in the past. So 2 years ago, BlackRock, which is $8-9 trillion asset manager, the largest in the world, they started their annual message to shareholders with the following words: climate risk is investment risk. And what that effectively means is that your entire institutional investor community, your asset management industry, pension funds, the way they look at finance today is very different from what it was several years ago. Sustainable finance has now become mainstream. It is not a little ESG component that banks or asset managers allocate. They have to invest in environmental projects and do some solar projects or energy, sustainable energy projects. There's a fundamental revolution underway, which means that we now have the potential, in my view, to reposition Africa from an investment perspective. Africa, for example, is a continent with the largest deficit in terms of energy. We heard yesterday that north of 500 million people do not have access to sustainable supply of electricity. Yet there's large volumes of capital, institutional investor capital, available to be invested in energy. So where is the gap? There's a massive perception around the risk of doing business in Africa. Financial markets are typically more underdeveloped. Capital markets are underdeveloped. You do not have an enabling regulatory framework in many countries. What is required, in my view, is a series of new financial instruments that looks at risk and risk transfer through a different lens. There's a report which Dr. Franny Lothier, I think, is on the program, that she, together with the team of the G20, produced about 9 months ago or so, which sets out a new approach for multilateral development banks. And essentially, what they are saying is that we should not just be financing projects. In the past, we, for example, as a bank, we've got 98 infrastructure projects we have financed. We typically use our own capital from our own balance sheet and provide debt either in the form of loans or equity or guarantees to that project. We will move away from that approach to be much more catalytic. We want to, in future, use our high credit worthiness, because MDBs, multilateral banks, are the highest rated banks in the world. They are the only AAA rated institutions in the world. In our case, we have a AA plus international credit rating, which means that the capacity of these institutions to take on more risk is there, and it is underutilized. So this report, which Dr. Franny and her team put together, comes to the conclusion that development banks can do a lot more, that we have been very conservative, we have been obsessed with maintaining this high credit worthiness, and in the process, we do not finance real projects that are out there. In short, what I'm saying in a long-winded way is that there's a different approach to risk and risk transfer. There are new financial instruments, in particular guarantees, and green guarantees is the way we frame it now, where we will make use of our high credit rating to provide for an entrepreneur in South Africa or whichever other country on Africa the project is in. They can then raise money in the domestic market in local currency. And this is maybe the final point I'd like to make, is that in the past, many large sustainable projects, infrastructure projects, have been financed in US dollars. It is very important that we develop the local currency markets of our member countries, because there are pools of savings in the pension funds domestically that can be utilized also in those projects. I'll pause there, Pedro, and we can pick up on some of these themes again.
Great, Leslie. Don't stand on the microphone. I will go. I know. I believe that the fit and the purpose of strategies is for purpose, and it's for execution. And the scope of government is what's lacking is management. So it's, again, execution. Let me try to understand it even on a deeper level. In your point of view, if a government or a company comes up to your bank and they wants to finance a project in Africa, what will take to be on top notch your analysis and grade and scoring?
Yeah. The first point to make, as I mentioned, is that our bank, because we were only started in 2015, the bank is a new financial institution and one of the few institutions globally that has in its very statute the word sustainable development and sustainable infrastructure. When multilateral banks were formed, way back 70 years ago, the Bretton Woods institutions, Africa Development Bank, Asia Development Bank, these words were not codified in this form. So the first aspect, the first criteria is sustainability.
Okay.
We want to finance projects, battery storage, wind power, solar power, green hydrogen, everything to do with the new economy. So that's the first metric that we have to get assessed on. Secondly, development banks, we are commercial in our thinking, but development impact is the second metric. We will finance a project that supports and creates jobs, that supports women entrepreneurs, that supports employment of young people. So with a series of development impact metrics that all of us have as assessment. Now, a lot of people assume that a project necessarily has to be commercial in the sense that generate a rate of return that a commercial bank would be satisfied with. It is possible in many instances that we as a development bank can improve the risk-return profile of a project by putting in concessional capital, which is what the World Bank does, and AFDB. And by improving the risk-return profile of the project, they're then able to attract commercial finance. And this is one of the biggest lack today in finance in Africa and more broadly, is there's too small a pool of concessional capital available. Because we have a lot of potential on the African continent, but the risk appetite of big institutions is such that they wouldn't step into those markets. So you need someone, ideally someone with a very high credit worthiness, to come in and to take that first risk and to improve the conditions and the ecosystem that allows others to participate.
Great. I'll let you rest a little bit, but I'll come back to you. Luis, dear friend, I'll ask him, the floor is yours. I'm just an enabler of the discussion and trying to get focus on the debate, and that's great. Thank you. The first statement. Luis, where about this? Where do you think are the potential, the highest priority projects to invest in Africa? How can we assemble partnerships between companies from the different competence, origin, size, and so on, the whole value chain? And how can these companies, these projects, these states be able to fulfill and to boost the F that is, I believe, it's the missing link for a long time in all this development strategy. Thank you, Luis.
Thank you. If you allow me, my first words will be to the Diáspora Conselho for the invitation. It's enormous pleasure to be here again. It's my second time in a row, so it's really
not the last.
Very very nice to be here again. So what I think Africa has huge potential. We heard yesterday many keynotes and many interventions here speaking about the potential we have in Africa. So it's a continent with 1.3 billion people, more young people. It's with a lot of opportunities. So what I feel, and I agree with Leslie, the perception many countries has or have related to Africa, it's not good. So I believe we need to change, because the numbers don't lie. So in the last 20 years, what we see, it's a decrease in investment in Africa from, for example, European countries. But in the same time, we see, for example, the Asian investments in Africa, more related to China, increased a lot. So I believe for European countries, they need to find a new way to deal with Africa, and I believe it's really important to not be afraid to deal with us. So because if we don't, or if Europe don't do that, what we'll see, it's probably Africa. This century is for sure Africa's century. Because so many potential we have in Africa, and if European countries don't understand that, for sure they will lose the influence they had in the past in Africa, because many other parts of the world, namely China, Asia, and even the United States, are looking for Africa in a different way today. In my country, for example, we have intentions, for example, for America Exim Bank to invest in green energy, for example.
Okay.
And there are so many opportunities there. And in my local knowledge, and we have so many business doing mainly for Portuguese companies in Angola, and so we heard I believe the president of ISAP telling that there are so many Portuguese companies investing in Angola, and they find a way to manage the risk to invest in a country like Angola. So what I try to say is the knowledge is there. Maybe not the right persons are involved in that decisions, because many companies, many businessmen are there, are in Africa, operating in Africa, taking African risk, and helping develop projects in Africa. So if we can ask them to share their knowledge, their experience in Africa or in dealing with Africa, maybe we can find a way to that big capital to go to Africa and find a way to finance projects in Africa. So I believe there is a huge opportunity in Africa, and next years it
Okay.
will be very
I
nice.
will come back to you, Luis. Thank you. And trying to understand, again, the scope for Banco Fomento de Angola. We have our proxy in Portugal also, and let's talk about a little bit about where do you act and where is your home turf and your priority perimeter. But let me get to Anna. Welcome through the large screen. Be very welcome. It's a pity we don't have you in Portugal, but it's an honor to have you alive. You are okay? You hear us okay, Anna?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and apologies for the delay as I was engaged in an in-person meeting with Prime Minister in Kenya. So apologies for the delay. I'm delighted to be with you. I'm sorry I wasn't able to be there in person.
Not at all, Anna. No apologies needed. It's a pleasure to have you here with us. Anna, we are discussing here about the concretization, the implementation of sustainable finance. The feeling here that the investors and the business people have very often is that they know what to do, they know what the market needs, the countries, the regions, the governments have signaled the priorities for development, for sustainable and integrated development. But very often it just doesn't happen, isn't born for a long time or at all. And there's a sense of I've mentioned a missing link here, which level the playing field with financing. So in your point of view, what would you recommend all these investors and countries and regions and governments in order to boost this agenda? We all are aligned that the moment for Africa has come. Anita has started yesterday our meeting here with Africa has risen. That's clear. Let's see what happens to Europe. That's another discussion. But we are on the safe side. We are on the positive side regarding Africa. Now, how do we make it happen? More projects, more tenders, more funding, more opportunities. What are the needs, requests that you see in order to generate a sustainable development and growth regarding infrastructure, water, energy, health, education, agriculture, logistics, you name it. Can you share a little bit with us your experience and your view? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much for inviting me and for the question. I think I couldn't agree with you more that, Africa is the future. Africa has huge potential and will represent 40% of the workforce by 2100. Will be getting younger, where all the other continents will be getting older, and has the potential for solar. 60% of the global potential for solar is in Africa, has the potential of sequestering a third of global needs. So it represents a huge opportunity, investment opportunity, to make sure that this potential is actually reached, not just for the future of Africa, but for the future of the world. And what we need to think about is how can we actually leverage that in terms of financing and investment. And there are multiple layers. I think the issue is perhaps the risk perception that kind of plays as a determinant or a hindrance in a way. And part of it is driven by the fact that Africa, for the same economic fundamentals, tends to pay 150 to 250 basis points higher than other countries with similar fundamentals. And this basically trickles down to the private sector. So here, what is needed is to make sure that there are financing instruments like blended finance, like credit enhancement, to make sure that there is affordable finance to crowd in the private sector. That would be key. And to make sure also that in the current global context, where there have been huge disruptions for global supply chains, whether it's because of COVID-19, whether because the war in Ukraine, whether it's due to geopolitical tensions. But we see that everywhere, that there is basically a move from global supply chains that are just really focused more on cost and efficiency to more trust and proximity. This is a huge opportunity for actually strengthening the relationship and investment and trade between Europe and Africa because of the proximity, because of the long standing relationships. So we need to make sure that in recalibrating these global value chains, that we are really making sure that Africa gets in that space, and we build these links. In terms of the financing, I think we need to focus on having these kind of like blended credit enhancement, but then we also need to perhaps have more of awareness raising in a way. If you look, there was some very interesting work before that was done in terms of difference in perception between prospective investors and existing investors, international investors. And usually for prospective investors, the key things that, if you're asked the key obstacles or why they are not investing, or obstacles to them making the decision, would be social and political instability. Whereas for existing ones, it would be more about skills or needed infrastructure. So I think there is a perception gap that need to be really closed, and that can be done also within European investors in terms of those that have been long-standing versus new ones. I think we need to make more of these things. And then, of course, there are the kind of very promising areas that we need to perhaps attract more investments in. So let me just give one example. And this is based on a study that the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa helped with for the case of DRC in terms of producing precursor batteries. And we estimate, basically based on that study, that the cost of producing these batteries is 30% less than producing them in China or the US, and with lower net emissions. These are the type of investments that we need to attract more of in the continent. So build around these green minerals that we have in the continent, that fits quite well also with the trajectory that we want to have, and that also Europe want to have in terms of increasing reliance on renewable. So we need to really attract more of these investments rather than just have these kind of like exports of just raw material, including green minerals. So that is a very important area, but then also leveraging on the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, which comes in a very timely junction for Europe and for the world, that really kind of can help open up a huge market in terms of 1.4 billion population, young and growing, to leverage that to really enhance both the trade and investment between Europe and Africa. So these are some of the areas that we can be very potential strong areas to tap. And then I think one of the things that we need to really look into is cross-border carbon credit trade. We've been working with the issues of establishing and enhancing a carbon credit market, particularly in Congo Basin, in terms of establishing registries, in terms of harmonizing protocols. And our studies shows, for example, that if we're able to achieve $120 per carbon ton, Africa can actually be able to mobilize $84 billion a year. So we need to look into this, how we can actually enhance the integrity of these markets and allow this cross-border carbon trade.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna. Very interesting and insights. Tell me something. What about the timing of these projects, the the fast track that there's a sensation that a feeling that the projects take a long time to be obvious. They need to be full compliant, full transparency. That's obviously taken into account. But then they take a lot of time, and it's a very heavy procedure to activate this kind of sustainable finance in some of the DFIs and the global players, institutional global players. What's your view on that? Mm-hmm. Then I will move on with the panel, and I'll leave some time for questions from the audience so you can prepare, because here there are very specific sometimes situations that it's interesting to hear also the audience. Please, Anna, what's your view on this, this perception that maybe because of this lack of information on detail of what's going on in the DFIs and in Washington and so on, and what's going on the markets and the region and the countries, we lose a lot of time, and it's quite a heavy process.
I couldn't agree more with you. So I think this is definitely an area we need to seriously look into in terms of helping streamline. So we need to be able to have more timely, project cycle that is efficient, that is not over. It needs to be, of course, we need to ensure proper reporting, but it needs to be also not over cumbersome. And we need to ensure that Africa have sufficient funding for adaptation. Which is key. I think, we need to really tailor to the needs. Africa, is the region that contributes the least to global warming, and yet it bears the largest burden of the consequences of climate change. So we need to see these kind of calibrations in terms of the models of IFIs and MDBs, and need to make sure also that we increase, of course, the financing available for such sustainable investment needs, and that will need to come from things like optimization of balance sheets of MDBs, like as suggested by the G20 CAF report. It needs to also be through better capitalization of MDBs, and to make sure that also there is sufficient investments in terms of bankability, ensuring that there is capacity building and sufficient bankability of projects, the flow and the pipeline of these projects available. I think one of the things perhaps that puts sometimes Africa at a disadvantage is the size of the projects that you're looking for, because many of the projects that would come would be small. That is not perhaps as attractive in terms of size. So we need to find ways in which we can actually, combine these projects in a way that it can be attractive to MDBs and to large investors. So this is an area that needs further work, actually.
Thank you very much, Anna. Please stay with us if you are able, and interrupt us whenever you want. And that I agree. There's a task and a challenge for integrated bundle in order to gain scale. Rogério, you are the CEO of a global player nowadays. You have your group. It's on a growth spree. It has a very deep knowledge of the Portuguese economy. You are investing a lot in Latin America. You are also studying and acting in Africa. So I'll do two questions in one. The first, as the first round, and also put you the second question to do the first of the second round, and then we'll come back, and then we'll go to the audience. Rogério, tell us, please, in your point of view as an investor, you are on the other side of the table. First, when you look into Africa with your experience of Portugal and Latin America, where do you see the opportunities and the challenges and the potential? And the second question is, could you share with us the recommendations that for companies in other fields, in other sectors, but you've been also in an international consulting company before, so you have deep knowledge also of trust sector. What do you see or you recommend on a curve of experience to accelerate that? Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here again.
All ours.
Again. Just probably a bit of context. I understand that I'm not sure if I'm the only insurer in the room, but at least I'm the only insurer in the panel. So I probably it makes sense to give a bit of context about Fidelidade and about insurance in this context. As you said, Fidelidade, we are a Portuguese-based company. We have been investing abroad, and specifically for Africa, we are present in Angola, Mozambique, and Cape Verde. Actually, in those countries, we do not necessarily consider ourselves investors. We are there. Mm-hmm. So we have 3 local companies operated by local teams. We have more than 1,000 employees in these countries, developing the business in each of these countries. And so from that standpoint, we're not an investor. Mm-hmm. We still see ourselves as investors when you look at other countries in Africa, because we're looking for opportunities to grow, for sure, because we believe that Africa, again, is one of the continents with the largest potential, and we're still looking for opportunities. It's true that we have been investing more in Latin America recently, but we do not forget that Africa has a lot of potential to grow, and if the conditions are met, we would be very willing naturally to invest in other geographies. I will get to that. Just probably a bit of context about insurance. In a way, and when we're talking about in sustainable investment, insurance ends up being, and we consider ourselves as an enabler of development, as an enabler of the economy, because overall what we do, the core of our activity is to manage risk, and it's to provide protection. It's to provide a safety net of protection both for companies, for investors, and for the communities to develop and to thrive. So in that sense, we believe that our biggest role in the end is to be able to come up with products, with solutions that provide this kind of protection. And when we look at what's happening, for example, and since we're talking about sustainability, when we look at what's happening nowadays with climate change, I think we believe it's our role to come up with solutions, the best solutions possible, to adapt, to help the economy and the agents and the people to adapt and mitigate everything that has to do with climate change. That in Africa, there are at least some geographies more than others, but clearly we're feeling the impact of this climate change. So we see ourselves on one hand as this enabler of the development of the economy on one hand. We're also institutional investors. So that means that in the countries where we do invest as an insurer in the specific vehicles and products that might exist to support our business. It's part of the core business that we have. And then, of course, we see ourselves as a potential investor in other geographies. When we look, and let me, since we're talking about here, I'm talking about insurance, I'm the insurers in the room. Let me also bring another perspective, which I'm not sure that everybody is aware of this. As an insurer, and this is now, I would say it's pretty recent, but it's a clear trend, insurers will be forced to do sustainable business. Mm-hmm. So to give you an idea, everybody is now measuring the climate, the carbon footprint, which is what we're doing also. But it's from the regulatory perspective, I can tell you that our own carbon footprint is about 3 to 5% of the overall carbon footprint for which we will be accountable. Meaning that insurers will be responsible for the investments they make and for the insurances that we provide. What this means is that at a certain moment in time, well, it's starting now, we will be incentivized to only invest and to only provide insurance for sustainable businesses. And this is an important statement because it means that our focus will shift tremendously because we will be looking for opportunities to invest in all kinds of solutions, in all kinds of vehicles, and in companies and in projects that will have a sustainable a sustainable focus. And this is very important. This is true for Portugal, it's true for Europe, and it will be true for our African operations too. And so what this means is that we will be looking for opportunities. That is the good thing. And we will be looking for opportunities to finance projects that are sustainable, on one hand. But on the other hand, we'll be also looking or forcing almost and pushing the businesses and the people to have more sustainable behaviors. So what this means is, the other day I was in an interview and people were telling me, so you will stop doing insurance in this particular industry. And we said, no, that's not what we want to do. But what we want to do is to make sure that that particular company has a plan or is going to do sustainable business in the future, and we will be supporting them in this process. So there is a transition here to be made. We will not stop making insurance for everybody, but there is a clear trend on which we are, from the regulatory standpoint, we have to do it. So we will be on the forefront, we believe, of helping the agents, the economy, the players in each of the countries where we are, to be making this transition into a more sustainable behavior.
So there will be a kind of taxonomy and a grid that will upgrade your scoring of the companies and giving a premium to those that are carbon-free companies. Is that so?
You might imagine that we will be reducing our own carbon footprint, but in the end, 95% of my footprint is not related to me. It's related with investments we make, and it's related with insurances that we make. So we will be, of course, pushing and helping the companies and the potential projects to be more sustainable, because as they are more sustainable, I will be reducing my carbon footprint, and this is a must. So this said, what does this mean? It means, of course, that, again, from the insurance standpoint, we will be very much behind any project that has a sustainable focus. And we've been talking, and I think we've been talking here about renewable energy, water management, but not only. If you're talking about health, education, these kind of things are also relevant from our standpoint. And so they actually fit very much with the needs of what we think. When we look at a continent that has all this potential to grow, we understand that these are clear needs that need to be addressed. And so it's good because we are all aligned in this path. Of course, we're not operational investors. I mean, that's not what we do. We're not industrial investors, but we are investors and enablers of this path moving forward. And that's how we see ourselves. And therefore, we will be looking for opportunities to help the economy to thrive in this sense. From the investor perspective, and I think you also wanted to talk about that, when we talk about investing in other countries, and this is something that we look, naturally, what is important for us, and it's very important to understand that insurance is a regulated business. We are risk managers, which means that typically we are risk averse. And so what we look for is an institutional framework that is stable, a macroeconomic environment that is reasonably stable, and of course, I don't even talk about the potential to grow, because Africa has a huge potential to grow. So that is a given. But then we need to look for the criteria that makes sense for us to be a potential investor in other geographies, and we keep on updating the analysis and looking for specific opportunities to do so. Of course, if a country is growing and if it has the right framework, we would be a potential interested party in investing in one of these countries. That's where we are today.
As a group, you also have invested. I don't know if everybody knows that. One of the main private operators in health, Luz Saúde. Is Luz Saúde also considering the African markets as a...
Yeah, Luz Saúde is one of the key healthcare providers in Portugal. Well, the Portuguese know this. And there is a plan to grow internationally, actually. Okay. But again, it's a plan that depends on having the specific framework. And to tell you the truth, we're looking at opportunities both in Latin America and in Africa. We've looked at Africa. Typically, it would make more sense for Luz to be in the geographies where we are already present. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we cannot put together the right, let's say, ingredients to make this happen. And again, the key problems are typically the framework, the institutional framework, and the stability that requires to invest. Investments in health typically can be very intensive because basically you need to build infrastructure. Wow. You need to build infrastructure, and you need to find the right framework for the skills and for the competencies to work, and that is sometimes a problem. That is also the reason why we keep saying that there must be a significant investment in education, not only to provide qualified skills for the economy and for the country to grow, but also for these skills to be used on, let's call it, on the public institutions that will guarantee the credibility that the country ultimately needs. But yes, we've looked at this. It's still on the table. It's always on the table because we have a sort of a mechanism that every once in a while we take a look at what's going on and see what the opportunities are, and we're still looking for that. So it's a matter of, again, opportunity and fitting our own criteria, because the appetite is there. We are strong believers in Africa overall, and we are strong believers in the places where we already are. As I said, for now it's still only the Portuguese-speaking countries, but even last year we ended up doing a significant acquisition in Mozambique, for example. So we bought a significant stake in an insurance company in Mozambique. We were already there, but with a smaller operation, and we merged. And we created this company that is now Fidelidade Impar, which is number 3 in Mozambique. So that says everything about our commitment to continue to invest and to follow up on the development of
Basically, it's on your DNA. Thank you for the insights, Rogério. Luis, coming back to you, what are the projects, the companies, the situations that that you would like to see entering into your door in order to consider funding, promoting, investing through the Angola Development Bank? Which are the top picks for you in your point of view?
Thank you. If you allow me, I will start taking the example of Fidelidade. As you know, the bank I run started with a branch of a Portuguese bank in Angola 3 decades ago. The projects evolved during that period, and they still are very relevant shareholders in our operation. It's Bank BPI, and during that 3 decades, the returns for BPI were really good. So there are many opportunities in Africa, and companies can make money there. So that's the main point when you think invest in Africa. The opportunities are there and are profitable. Not there are bad business, but there are bad business.
That's
all around,
the macro landscape.
All around, yes, all around the country.
What is more bankable, on your point of view?
There are many.
Sorry to be
no problem. There are many.
So pressing on the.
No.
But
that's
I
okay.
think it's
that's
interesting
okay.
for
that's okay.
the companies and investors.
There are so many kinds of projects. In our experience, we provide loans. We are a bank, so we provide loans. We finance many projects, from infrastructures to education, even green energy, power stations. So there are many opportunities to invest. And what I believe is, if we can focus on the right points that divide us and make harder to achieve the goals we want to accomplish. We can do great things in Africa. So there are many opportunities there. So I believe, and we support many initiatives, not only from Angolan business, but also from other countries. So we support many projects, and we are really involved in find a way to help improve the conditions we have. Even when we speak about the relationship between African banks and European banks, we in the last 10 years, we made huge improvements in the way we deal with risks. For example, compliance, risk management, and things that we understand are really important for many partners, and they focus a lot on that issues.
Oh.
So African banks in the last years made a lot of improvements in that side. So
That's very interesting. Thank you. Leslie, help us decode this new world. What should we expect from these new dynamics? I don't want to go so skyrocket into geopolitics and geostrategy and geoeconomics, but how can we understand the aftermath, what will happen on the point of view of Asia investing into Africa, namely China, regarding these? I've been through ICEP, I've been also working with the Foreign Affairs Ministry, so I will put it diplomatically, these dynamics of the world, of decouplings, of new competition, hyperpotencies, and so on. And I believe what's the new awakening, the great awakening, which is the South awakening. There's a new force in the world, which is the South. And Africa, it's a cornerstone of that strategy. So there's no more this conversation, which side are you aligning, and so on. Africa has a place of itself, has a strength of itself, has an autonomy of itself, has a potential of itself, has a future that others don't have, by the way, I believe. So in these new dynamics, what should Africa countries, Africa governments, Africa companies, and the other partners from Europe, namely, expect in these next years regarding this agenda of Asia investment into Africa?
Thank you very much. I think, firstly, as you know, as I mentioned, the New Development Bank, like others, have very strong emerging market focus, right? It's important also to highlight that, African countries and the African continent as a whole have very unique history, very unique and special economic conditions linked to colonialism and linked to a past that still requires redress. I think it's very important to also highlight that it is very important for us, all of the individual African countries, to try and insulate ourselves from the sort of macro geopolitics. We have to be selfishly focused on our economic development. It's not about US versus China and about, picking sort of ideological long-term partners. Africa must do what is in Africa's interest. Our economy at this stage, our collective, if you look at the size of the African continent, it is right now the size of Africa relative to the global world, as we've just highlighted, is still very small. Let's take emissions. We're talking about sustainability. Africa only produces 3.8% of global greenhouse gas emissions, right? This is an entire continent. So this whole focus on shifting towards fighting climate change could lead to Africa or resources shifting away from Africa to other parts of the world. Because if you want to fight climate change, where are the biggest greenhouse gas emissions? It's in China, 27% in China, followed by India, then European Union, United States, and so on. The key point I'm making is that Africa must focus on what is essential for our economic development and not pick ideological sides. We must be able to benefit from the available pools of finance that come from China, that comes from the United States, that comes from the European Union. But we must align ourselves with this new sustainable pathway, which is really what net zero and the sustainable transition is all about. It is clear that we need to align our countries towards this new sustainable pathway, because these industrial strategies associated with sustainability will create new jobs. If we can make Africa the heart of solar power, for example, green hydrogen industries, and electric vehicle manufacturing, battery storage, there's massive potential for these industries to become the industries of the future and for Africa to lead in that path. We have most of the minerals that goes into the batteries that produce the electric vehicles. Yet we have we don't control any of the supply chains, right? They are controlled by other parts of the world. So we should look beyond exporting our own commodities, our own lithium, that goes into the cobalt and so on, that goes into production of cell phones, into production of batteries, to try and have a industrial strategy to capture all of the economic gains that can come from these industries. In short, what I'm saying is that we must take a narrow self-interest focused on what is in our best interest to create jobs and economic opportunities for our people.
Fully agree. Great, thank you. And just to close, and then open for one or two questions on the audience. And yesterday we were here listening about and hearing and discussing the reverse engineering of internationalization exports of Africa. That some technologies, some projects are ready to and are being created in Africa in order to go for the international markets. How do you see these dynamics also? And regarding namely these projects, the Global Gateway and the EIBs and other multilateral platforms, in your point of view, are they sufficient? Are they enough? And they are on the right blending and track in order to make these projects happen?
Thank you. I think there are a number of course, the Global Gateway is a good step forward in terms of enhancing collaboration, but also we need to make sure that we are really listening to the voices of Africa in terms of the projects and the needs. So, for example, in NEPAD, there is already a list of infrastructure projects that are identified that need investments. So it's good to actually build on specific identified opportunities by the continent to then attract the investment and direct investments toward it. So there need to be some sort of a match between, the interest of Europe and the funding and the investments and the needs in the continent. And as I had mentioned, for example, the Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement can offer a very useful opportunity in terms of harmonizing the investment regulatory framework that can then unleash a potential for a huge market for companies. I think what is really important is to make sure that there is sufficient financing to get the potential of all these type of areas that are needed, economic potential. And for that, we need to also make sure that we are getting, for example, using more of guarantee instruments, whether for official or for private. And this is an area that tends to be lower cost, but very effective in terms of reducing the risk perception and the cost of financing. So we need to really expand on these areas going forward, and we need to focus on the transformative also projects. Like I think number of us in this panel have already talked about, industries that are based around green minerals. We need to make sure that investments flow, to make sure that these type of opportunities are domesticated, that the countries that have these resources get to benefit, capture them, and build the regional value chains within the continent to support. We need to, get into areas like, the whether it's, the renewable energy, electric vehicles, the batteries, to make sure that we benefit from all these resources rather than just export raw material. And these offer huge opportunities for European investors and for funding to get actually high return if it's well designed and implemented. And we need to make sure that from both sides, both African side and European side, that the regulatory framework really supports such stronger collaboration and removes obstacles. And to lower really transaction cost for both the trade and investment for these cooperation opportunities to foster.
Thank you, Hannah. So, and I fully agree what has been said, that the importance of guarantees. The Portuguese ecosystem of exports internationalization can count on a state-of-the-art institution, which is COSEC in Portugal, and which helps and boosts this agenda with very highly skilled professionals, and that's been very important on our spree to internationalize our companies and our economy.